One day before Christmas, my dad smirked and told me, "Your brother's friends are spending Christmas here. It is only 30 people." My brother nodded. They expected me to cook clean and bow. I smiled. That night, I flew to Hawaii for a trip. When they saw an empty kitchen, my brother's face turned pale, but the real surprise was still to come. I am Jada, 35 years old, and the founder of a luxury hospitality empire that my family knows absolutely nothing about. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who severely underestimated your worth. The morning of December 23rd started with the sharp scrape of thick paper sliding across polished mahogany. I was sitting in the grand formal dining room of my parents' sprawling Atlanta suburban home, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. My father Calvin stood at the head of the table, wearing his usual expression of unquestioned authority. He did not say good morning. He did not ask how my drive over was or inquire about my life. He simply slid a massive stapled 6-page document across the table until it stopped right over my coffee saucer. I looked down at the bold black lettering across the top. It read, "Master Grocery and Preparation List." I glanced up at my father. He adjusted his expensive gold watch and informed me that my brother Malik was hosting his high-net-worth investors and their families starting tomorrow morning. 30 people in total were arriving for a multi-day holiday stay. My father dictated his instructions as if he were speaking to an entry-level employee. I was to immediately procure all the groceries on this list, pay for them up front, prepare a 5-course Christmas Eve dinner, execute a full Christmas Day brunch, and manage all the cleanup duties while the guests relaxed in the living room. I scanned the pages. The list demanded organic dry-aged Wagyu beef, imported caviar, fresh oysters, truffles, and cases of vintage champagne. They expected me to fund this entirely out of my own pocket, assuming my small catering gig could somehow absorb a massive financial blow for the sake of family duty. My mother, Yvonne, walked into the dining room carrying a silver tray of pastries. She did not offer me one. Instead, she immediately started complaining about how crucial this weekend was for Malik. She reminded me with a frantic edge to her voice that Malik was up for partner at his prestigious investment firm. This was his make or break moment. She told me I needed to step up and do my part to ensure his success. Her desperate pleas mirrored the time years ago when she and my father drained my college savings account to pay for Malik's lavish fraternity dues. They had told me then that his networking opportunities were the future of the family. Now they were demanding my labor and my money to secure his next promotion. Malik strolled into the room, adjusting the cuffs of his custom-tailored suit. The golden child had officially arrived. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned casually against the doorframe, looking at me with thinly veiled exhaustion. "Come on, Jada," he scoffed, rolling his eyes at my silence. "You just cook for a living. It is what you do. Do not embarrass me in front of my boss, Mr. Sterling. He needs to see that I come from a family that understands high-level execution." His words hung in the crisp morning air. He truly believed I was just a struggling local caterer scraping by on weekend gigs and holiday favors. None of them knew that the Jada Experience was a multi-million-dollar culinary and hospitality holding group spanning the entire East Coast. They had never cared enough to ask about my business, so I had never bothered to tell them the truth. The swinging kitchen door pushed open, and in walked Chelsea, my brother's white wife. She was wearing a pristine cashmere sweater and an expression of supreme entitlement. Chelsea stopped beside my chair and casually tossed a bundle of cheap fabric onto the table, right next to the 6-page grocery list. It was a plain black uniform apron. "Please make sure you wear this tomorrow," Jada Chelsea said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of sweet condescension she reserved exclusively for me. "We want this to look like a professional high-end catered event. We cannot have it looking like Malik's sister is just helping out in the kitchen. Mr. Sterling expects the absolute best, and a proper uniform sets the right boundary." She smiled, but her eyes were cold and calculating. It is just about maintaining the right aesthetic, she added, dismissing me completely as she turned to pour herself some sparkling water. I looked down at the cheap black fabric resting on the expensive wood. I looked at Chelsea's smug face, Malik's arrogant posture, my mother's nervous, demanding energy, and my father's hard glare. The disrespect in the room was so thick it practically suffocated the air. They wanted me to shrink myself, put on a servant's uniform, and bow down to serve them and their wealthy friends. They wanted me to be the invisible labor behind Malik's shiny golden success story. I did not yell. I did not flip the table or raise my voice. Years of ruthless corporate negotiations had taught me the devastating power of absolute calm. I picked up the plain black apron and carefully folded it into a perfect neat square. I placed it gently in the exact center of the mahogany table right next to the absurd grocery list. I picked up my designer purse and stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. I looked directly into my father's eyes, then panned my gaze to Malik and finally to Chelsea. I smiled. It was a chillingly serene smile that made Chelsea actually take a half step backward in hesitation. I will make sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve tomorrow, I said quietly. My voice was completely steady, betraying absolutely zero emotion. I turned and walked out the front door without another word, ignoring my father's sudden sharp demand for me to come back and confirm the menu. I climbed into my car and merged onto the highway. I did not drive to the grocery store. I drove straight to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The holiday traffic was brutal, but my mind was perfectly clear and singularly focused. I parked in the elite executive lot, walked straight through the private security terminal that my company paid an annual premium for, and approached the first-class ticketing desk. I booked the next available direct flight to Maui. 2 hours later, I was settling into a plush leather pod in the first-class cabin. The flight attendant offered me a glass of vintage champagne and a warm towel. I accepted the drink, listening to the frantic chiming of my phone as text messages from my mother began to roll in, demanding to know what time the appetizers would be ready for prep. I took a slow sip of the champagne, switched my phone to airplane mode, and leaned back against the comfortable headrest. As the jet engines roared to life and carried me high above Atlanta, I closed my eyes, knowing exactly the kind of devastating storm I was leaving behind for them to face completely alone. The heavy thud of the plane wheels hitting the Maui tarmac was the exact moment my old life officially ended. I waited for the seatbelt chime to echo through the first-class cabin, reached into my designer tote bag, and turned off airplane mode. My screen froze for 3 full seconds before the digital explosion began. 47 missed calls, 102 text messages. The barrage was relentless, vibrating my palm with the chaotic energy of a family completely unraveling thousands of miles away. It was exactly 8 in the morning on Christmas Eve in Atlanta. I bypassed the wall of frantic text messages and tapped directly on the first voicemail from my mother, Brenda. Her voice did not carry the warm, elegant holiday cheer she always performed for the congregation at our megachurch. It was a venomous, frantic hiss echoing through the phone speaker. "Camille, where are the organic groceries? The delivery window closed an hour ago, and the driveway is completely empty. Jamal's guests are going to be here in exactly 4 hours. Stop throwing a childish tantrum over a simple uniform and get to this house right now to prep the hors d'oeuvres. You are actively trying to ruin your brother's chance to make partner. Do you realize what is at stake here? Jamal's network is the future of this family." I listened to her desperate, ragged breathing through the audio feed and let out a soft, chilling laugh. Her exact words echoed a conversation we had 16 years ago. I was 19 years old, standing in that exact same immaculate suburban kitchen, holding a tuition bill for the elite culinary arts program I had worked tirelessly to get accepted into. My parents had called me into the room to coldly inform me that my college savings account was empty. They had quietly drained it to pay for Jamal's luxury off-campus apartment, his designer suits, and his exorbitant fraternity dues. My father, Roland, had looked me dead in the eye, completely devoid of guilt. He told me that a black man needs to be surrounded by the absolute right people to survive in corporate America. He said Jamal's network was the family future and that I could easily take out loans at a community college because I just wanted to cook anyway. They had happily sacrificed my education and my future to fund his fraudulent facade. Now they fully expected my free labor and my culinary expertise to secure his next massive promotion. I deleted the voicemail with a quick swipe of my thumb and stepped out of the airport into the brilliant Hawaiian sun. My private driver was already waiting holding a polished wooden placard bearing my name. 40 minutes later, I was stepping onto the sprawling private lanai of my beachfront luxury suite. The Pacific Ocean stretched out before me, a brilliant, endless expanse of turquoise and gold. A hotel attendant silently placed a freshly muddled Mai Tai on the glass table next to my lounge chair, bowed respectfully, and retreated into the suite. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the sharp bite of lime and premium rum. The tropical breeze washed over my face entirely, replacing the bitter, freezing tension of Atlanta. I picked up my phone and dialed my executive assistant in New York. She answered on the very first ring. "Good morning, boss," she said, her tone bright and professional. "How is Maui treating you?" "Maui is absolute perfection," I replied, leaning back against the plush cushions. "I need you to execute two immediate directives right now. First, I need you to access our vendor accounts and permanently cancel the phantom grocery order I placed for my parents' Atlanta address. Do not let a single delivery truck or catering van anywhere near their neighborhood." My assistant chuckled softly, knowing exactly the kind of corporate warfare I was currently engaging in. "Consider it done, Camille. What is the second directive?" I looked out at the rolling waves crashing against the pristine shoreline. "Access the corporate banking accounts for the elite Camille Experience Holding Group. Find the two secondary black cards issued under Roland and Brenda's names. Revoke their access immediately and permanently. Flag any pending charges from this morning as unauthorized and lock the accounts down." My parents had been aggressively using my corporate credit cards to secretly fund their country club lunches, their lavish wardrobe upgrades, and their massive church donation pledges for 2 straight years. They paraded around their suburban circle, pretending their wealth came from Roland's retiring investments, all while treating the actual source of their income like a hired maid in front of their golden child. The financial free ride was officially over. I could practically hear the rhythmic clacking of my assistant's keyboard as she processed the commands in real time. "Cards are locked and entirely frozen, Camille," she confirmed efficiently. "They will be declined anywhere they try to swipe them." "Is there anything else you need me to handle today?" "Enjoy your holiday," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips. I hung up the phone and placed it flat on the glass table, watching the condensation drip down the side of my cocktail glass. Before I could even take another sip, the screen lit up with a rapid succession of incoming messages. This time it was Jamal. The arrogant, condescending tone he had used just 24 hours prior was completely gone. His texts were pure, unadulterated panic bleeding through the screen in desperate bursts of digital terror. "Mr. Sterling just pulled into the driveway. He is 3 hours early. The kitchen is completely empty. There is no food, Camille. The private caterers are not answering their phones. Brittany is literally crying on the floor in the pantry. She does not know how to cook any of this. Where the hell are you? You are destroying my life. Answer the phone, right now." I leaned forward in my lounge chair and raised my phone to eye level, framing the shot perfectly. I snapped a crystal-clear, high-definition photo of the breathtaking Hawaiian sunset painting the horizon in violent shades of burning orange and deep purple. I attached the gorgeous image directly to his frantic message thread. I typed out my reply with slow, deliberate precision, ensuring every single letter carried the weight of absolute finality. "Aloha. Hope Brittany knows how to use an oven." I hit send, turned my phone face down on the glass table, and took another slow sip of my drink, listening to the sound of the ocean while my family faced the terrifying reality of their own incompetence. I settled deeper into my lounge chair and watched the waves crash against the pristine Maui shore. The tropical sun warmed my skin, a stark contrast to the freezing temperatures I had happily left behind. Back in Atlanta, the weather was plummeting, and the atmosphere inside my parents' grand suburban home was undoubtedly dropping right along with it. I knew this for a fact because my cousin Keisha was sitting right in my parents' living room, secretly broadcasting the entire disaster straight to my phone. My screen lit up with a rapid-fire burst of messages. Keisha was a notoriously fast typer and she was holding absolutely nothing back. "Girl, it is a complete disaster in here," she wrote. 30 people just walked through the front doors wearing mink coats and Rolex watches expecting a Michelin star experience. The kitchen is an absolute ghost town. I took a slow sip of my tropical drink and typed back, asking for a specific update on my brother's wife. Keisha responded instantly. "Chelsea is currently sitting on the floor of the walk-in pantry, having a full-blown panic attack. She literally cannot figure out how to turn on the induction stove. There is 30 pounds of expensive dry-aged Wagyu beef sitting on the counter, and she is sobbing because she refuses to touch raw meat." I read the text and let out a sharp laugh. I remembered perfectly how Chelsea had cornered me in that exact kitchen last Thanksgiving. She had watched me effortlessly prepare a massive holiday feast for 40 people, and casually remarked that Black women just possess a natural biological instinct for domestic labor. She had framed it as a compliment while actively trying to remind me of my place. Now, facing the intense pressure of hosting her husband's billionaire boss, she lacked the basic survival instinct to boil a simple pot of tap water. Keisha kept the live updates rolling. The weather in Atlanta was taking a violent turn. A freak winter ice storm was sweeping across the south, blanketing the suburban streets in an impenetrable layer of black ice. Malik was standing in the foyer screaming into his cell phone, trying to throw his premium credit card at any luxury catering service in the metropolitan area. But money means absolutely nothing when the roads are sheets of glass. DoorDash was completely suspended. Uber Eats was dead. Private couriers were grounded by the state. Even the local elite steakhouses had locked their doors and sent their staff home to brave the storm. "Malik is sweating right through his custom-tailored suit," Keisha wrote a few minutes later. "He just ordered your mother to raid the chest freezer in the garage. Jada, they are literally arranging frozen fish sticks and stale Ritz crackers on your mother's vintage silver platters. The billionaires are staring at the food like it is radioactive. The wives are holding their noses." I pictured Mr. Sterling, a man known for dining at exclusive private clubs in Manhattan and Dubai, staring down at a lukewarm, heavily breaded fish stick. The sheer humiliation Malik must be experiencing was a masterpiece I had orchestrated simply by choosing my own peace over their relentless exploitation. For years, I had broken my back to ensure their events were flawless. Now they were drowning in their own manufactured incompetence. Suddenly, my phone vibrated with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed an unrecognizable local Atlanta number. I assumed it was one of my regional managers calling about a venue and swiped the screen to accept the call. "You ungrateful, spiteful little girl." It was my father. Calvin had borrowed someone else's phone, knowing I would immediately block his actual number. His voice carried the booming, aggressive cadence he always used when standing at the pulpit of our mega church. For 30 years, that specific tone was designed to make me shrink, to make me bow my head and apologize for existing outside his rigid boundaries. He had always weaponized his authority and his religion to keep me firmly in my place beneath his golden sun. Today it just sounded pathetic. "You have humiliated this family for the absolute last time," Calvin snarled into the receiver. "You think you can run away to the beach while your brother's entire career is on the line. I am the head of this family. I am a respected deacon in our church. I will stand before the congregation this Sunday, and I will publicly strip your name from our family tree. I will make sure every single person in our community knows exactly how selfish and rebellious you are. You will be entirely excommunicated from our circle, Jada." He paused, breathing heavily into the receiver. He was waiting for the familiar sound of my submission. He was waiting for me to cry, to beg for his approval, to frantically promise I would book the next flight back to salvage his precious reputation. He truly believed the threat of losing his social circle would break me. I looked out at the vast, endless ocean. I thought about the massive luxury hospitality holding group I had built from the ground up. I thought about the hundreds of employees who relied on my leadership and the millions of dollars securing my absolute freedom. I did not need his church. I did not need his conditional love. You cannot excommunicate someone who already bought their own sanctuary. Dad, I said. My voice was a calm, chilling whisper that cut straight through his righteous fury. You cannot leverage a community against me when I outgrew your judgment a decade ago. Serve the fish sticks and pray for a miracle. I ended the call and instantly blocked the burner number. I took a deep breath of the salty Hawaiian air, feeling a profound sense of liberation. I had severed the last string holding me to their toxic dynamic. I was untouchable. My phone buzzed again. It was Keisha. I expected another humorous update about my mother's tears or Chelsea's ruined makeup. Instead, the message I read made my blood run completely cold and then immediately boil with a new intense level of anticipation. Jada Keisha wrote her text completely stripped of its previous humorous tone. Malik's boss, Mr. Sterling, just stood up in the middle of the dining room. He looked right past the terrible food and asked Malik why the elite Jada experience has not begun yet. Malik looks like he is actually going to throw up. Jada, why does his billionaire boss know your company's exact legal name? I sat perfectly still on my private lanai, the warm Hawaiian breeze suddenly feeling completely disconnected from the freezing reality playing out in my ear. The magnitude of what my mother had just confessed hung in the air like a physical weight. My parents, the prideful pillars of their suburban megachurch, the ones who looked down on my culinary career and constantly preached about financial responsibility, had gambled their entire existence on a lie my brother constructed using my success. They had taken out a second mortgage on the sprawling mansion they prized above all else. They had liquidated their retirement funds and leveraged my father's pension. They had handed every last dime to Malik to pay for a partner buy-in at a firm he was actively defrauding. And they had done it all because they believed his lie that he was the secret mastermind behind my multi-million-dollar empire. They believed in his phantom success so blindly, they never even thought to call me to verify if he actually owned my company. Mom, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You gave Malik your house and your retirement because he told you he owned my business. You never once picked up the phone to ask me if your son was actually my business partner. You just believed him because it fit your narrative that he is the genius, and I am just the hired help. Camille, please, my mother wailed, ignoring my question entirely. You have to save us. You are the only one who can fix this. All you have to do is get on a video call with Mr. Sterling. Tell him the ice storm delayed your flight. Tell him Malik is telling the truth about being your financial backer. Just play along until the partner promotion is officially inked and the bonus clears. We will pay you back. We promise. You cannot let your father and me lose our home on Christmas. You cannot be that cruel. The absolute audacity of her calling me cruel while demanding I commit federal corporate fraud to save the brother who tried to steal my life's work was almost breathtaking. They were perfectly willing to let me take the fall, to risk my own business license and my own freedom just to keep their golden child on his pedestal. I heard a scuffle in the background, and Calvin, my father's voice, boomed over the line. He had clearly snatched the phone from my weeping mother. Jada, you listen to me very carefully. Calvin commanded, his voice thick with the desperation of a man who realized his kingdom was built on sand. You will not destroy this family over your petty sibling jealousy. Malik is on the verge of securing generational wealth for us. You will log on to FaceTime right now. You will confirm the partnership with Mr. Sterling, and you will do it with a smile on your face. You owe us this. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You will submit to this family and do your part. The sheer entitlement radiating from the speaker washed away any lingering trace of familial guilt I might have possessed. They did not care about me. They only cared about the rescue boat I could provide. They wanted me to shrink myself down, put on the metaphorical black apron, and serve them one last time. I looked out at the ocean, watching a massive wave rise and shatter against the rocks with devastating force. I smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile that signaled the end of my patience and the beginning of my absolute reign. "You know what, Dad?" I said, my voice shifting from quiet shock to a smooth, confident purr. "You are right. This is a family matter, and families should always support each other in front of important guests." Calvin let out a loud exhale of relief, thinking he had successfully bullied me into submission one final time. "Thank God. I knew you would see reason, Jada. Now hurry up and call his phone." "Mr. Sterling is sitting in the living room getting impatient." "No," I replied smoothly. "Do not just hand Malik the phone. If we are going to do this, we are going to do it right. Mr. Sterling deserves a proper presentation. Connect your laptop to the 85-inch television in the living room. Put me on the big screen so everyone in the room can see and hear me clearly. 30 people are waiting for the elite Jada experience, right? Let me give them exactly what they came for." I could hear the frantic, joyful shuffling on the other end of the line. I heard my father barking orders at Malik, telling him to wipe his face and get the HDMI cable. I heard Chelsea crying in the background, suddenly relieved that the ghetto dropout sister was going to save her luxury lifestyle. They were celebrating in that freezing house, completely convinced they had broken my spirit and forced me back into my designated place beneath them. "Okay, Jada," Malik said, his voice breathless and trembling as he took the phone back. "I am setting it up right now. Just remember to call me your managing director. Let me do most of the talking. Just nod and confirm the corporate merger. I will make sure Mr. Sterling understands exactly who is in charge, Malik." I said, my tone dripping with sweet promise. "Send me the FaceTime link." I ended the call and placed my phone on the glass table. I did not immediately prepare to dial in. Instead, I opened my secure corporate email application. I scrolled past the dozens of automated holiday messages until I found the specific legal thread I had been monitoring for the past 48 hours. My chief operating officer and my team of elite corporate attorneys had been working around the clock finalizing a massive acquisition strategy I had secretly initiated months ago. I opened the final encrypted PDF document. It was a fully executed, signed, and legally binding contract. I reviewed the signatures, the transfer of controlling shares, and the effective date and time. Everything was perfectly in order. I downloaded the document directly to my phone, ready to screen share at a moment's notice. I received a text from Keisha. It was a photo of the living room. The 30 freezing, starving, highly expectant VIP guests were all seated on the expensive leather sofas, glaring impatiently at the massive blank television screen mounted on the wall. Malik was standing front and center, having quickly straightened his tie and wiped the sweat from his forehead, attempting to project the aura of a confident, powerful executive. My parents stood nervously in the corner, holding their breath. They were all waiting for me to lie, to shrink, to save them. The FaceTime notification popped up on my screen. Malik was calling. I adjusted my sunglasses, picked up my drink, and hit the green accept button, ready to burn their entire house of cards to the ground. The green accept button connected the call, and instead of the grand living room, I was greeted by the cramped, dimly lit interior of my parents' coat closet. The camera shook violently in Malik's trembling hand. He was sweating profusely, his eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. My mother Yvonne was weeping hysterically over his shoulder, clutching a designer tissue to her ruined makeup. And then there was Chelsea. She aggressively shoved her face into the frame, physically pushing Malik aside to command the screen. Her usually flawless blonde hair was sticking to her wet forehead, and her eyes were wild with rage. Chelsea did not ask for my help. She demanded it. She screamed into the phone that I was a selfish, bitter ghetto dropout who was purposely trying to ruin her perfect life. She claimed I was doing this out of pure jealousy because she had married a successful, wealthy man while I was still single and frying chicken for a living. She actually pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the camera and told me that I owed her husband. She screamed that without Malik's prestigious last name silently backing my little catering hobby, nobody in the corporate world would have ever hired me. She ordered me to get my act together, stop playing childish games, and lie to Mr. Sterling immediately so they could salvage the evening. Before I could even process the sheer blinding delusion of Chelsea's rant, a large hand violently snatched the phone away from her. The camera angle shifted wildly until my father Calvin's face filled the screen. His expression was pure, unfiltered rage. The polished, friendly megachurch deacon facade was completely gone. In its place was the ruthless patriarch who demanded absolute submission from everyone in his orbit. He coldly told Chelsea to shut up. He barked at Yvonne to stop her pathetic crying. Then he turned his furious glare directly onto me through the digital lens. Calvin used his deepest, most commanding voice, attempting to intimidate me from 4,000 miles away. He ordered me to remember my place in the family hierarchy. He told me that Malik was the undisputed anchor of our legacy, and that my petty, childish rebellion was going to end right this second. He said I had a moral obligation under God to protect the family name at all costs. He did not care about my business or my boundaries. He did not care that his golden son had just committed federal corporate fraud by forging financial documents and misrepresenting assets to a billionaire investor. Calvin only cared that the illusion of his perfect, wealthy, successful son was currently unraveling in the middle of his pristine living room. I looked at my father's furious red face through the screen, and I did not feel a single ounce of intimidation. I felt entirely detached. I took a slow, deep breath of the fresh ocean air and decided to remind him of a very specific conversation we had exactly 13 years ago. I asked him if he remembered sitting in his leather chair in his home office when I enthusiastically handed him the printed business plan for my very first commercial kitchen lease. He had barely glanced at the pages before tossing my hard work directly into the trash can. I reminded him how he had looked at my exhausted face, my hands blistered from working continuous 80-hour weeks, catering low-budget weddings, and told me to give up. He had told me that a black woman's only path to genuine wealth and respect in America was marrying a highly successful corporate man. He had told me to stop playing businesswoman and go find a husband who could provide for me the way Malik would one day provide for a proper elite wife. I kept my voice perfectly level as I reminded Calvin that he had completely disregarded my sweat, my blood, and my relentless grind. He had placed all of his bets, all of his pride, and all of his money on Malik, while actively starving me of any emotional or financial support. Now the son he worshipped like a deity was hiding in a dark coat closet, terrified and hyperventilating, begging the daughter he discarded to save him from absolute legal and financial ruin. Calvin refused to acknowledge a single word of the past. He ignored my logic, completely shifting immediately to his final, desperate ultimatum. He dictated exactly what I was going to do. I was going to do a live video call with Mr. Sterling and the rest of the angry VIP guests. I was going to put on a professional, apologetic face and take full responsibility for the catering disaster. I was going to tell Mr. Sterling that my flight out of Atlanta was delayed by the freak ice storm and I was trapped at the airport. And most importantly, I was going to look directly into the camera and confirm that Malik was my senior business partner and the primary financial backer of my entire holding company. Yvonne leaned into the frame, sobbing uncontrollably, her face a mask of pure terror. She begged me to just do this one little thing to save their lives. She repeated the horrifying reality that they had blindly taken out a massive second mortgage on the house just to buy Malik's fake partner shares to secure his promotion. She wailed that if Malik lost this job, the bank would immediately foreclose on their home. They would lose everything they had built to maintain their country club status. They would be public failures. They were literally begging me to commit massive corporate fraud to shield them from the devastating consequences of their own toxic greed. I did not answer them right away. I let absolute silence hang heavy on the line. I sat back in my plush lounge chair and watched the gentle, rhythmic sway of the palm trees on my private lanai. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, then 20 seconds. Through the phone speaker, I could hear their panicked, ragged breathing. I could hear the desperate, frantic energy bouncing off the walls of that tiny dark coat closet. I was forcing them to sit in the suffocating discomfort of their own making. I was letting them feel the absolute terror of realizing they had absolutely no control over me anymore. The silence quickly became unbearable for them. Malik started begging, his voice cracking with genuine fear. He promised he would pay me back every single dime. He promised he would make it right, Once the massive partnership bonus cleared his bank account, he was bargaining with imaginary money he did not have for a company he did not own and an executive position he was about to spectacularly lose. I looked at the screen and smiled to myself, feeling the warm ocean breeze blow softly through my hair. I was not angry anymore. I was just ready to end this charade permanently. I looked directly into my father's terrified, searching eyes. "Put me on the big screen in the living room," I said, my voice crystal clear and entirely calm. "I will talk to Mr. Sterling." Through the audio feed, I immediately heard a collective gasp of profound relief. My family actually rejoiced in the dark closet. Yvonne praised God. Calvin thanked me profusely, telling me I was finally acting like a dutiful daughter. Malik let out a wet, pathetic sob of relief. They hastily dried their tears, adjusted their expensive clothes, and prepared to face the living room, completely convinced they had broken me and won the game. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight to their own digital execution. I ended the call with my father cutting off his triumphant sigh before it could even fully materialize. The silence on my private lanai was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic crashing of the Pacific waves against the shore. I did not waste a single second wallowing in their manipulation. I opened my contacts and dialed Marcus, my chief operating officer. He answered before the second ring. "Execute the Sterling acquisition," I commanded. My voice was stripped of any familial warmth, replaced entirely by the cold precision of a CEO. Marcus did not hesitate. He confirmed the legal team had the final drafts queued up in my secure portal. He knew the stakes, and he knew exactly how long I had been waiting for this exact moment. I opened my encrypted email and pulled up the hostile takeover documents. The digital pages glowed against the bright Hawaiian morning. Scrolling through the asset lists and transfer deeds, I felt a profound sense of vindication. Every line of legal text represented a decade of relentless grinding. I had started with a single rented commercial kitchen, sleeping on a cot between prep shifts to fulfill catering orders for corporate luncheons. I spent years with bleach on my hands and burns on my forearms, scrubbing my own floors because I could not afford to hire a cleaning crew. I leveraged those small profits into a boutique event space, then a chain of high-end culinary venues, and eventually a massive real estate and hospitality portfolio. I built an empire with calloused hands and calculated risks. While I was studying zoning laws and securing commercial mortgages, Calvin and Yvonne were blindly funding Malik's carefully curated illusion. They paid the lease on his pristine Porsche. They covered his extravagant country club initiation fees. They bought him custom Italian suits so he could play the part of a successful investment banker while essentially functioning as a glorified junior analyst. They financed his fake, flashy lifestyle, believing his fabricated success would elevate the family name. I remembered coming home exhausted, smelling like industrial cleaner, only to hear Malik complaining about his golf swing while my mother massaged his shoulders. They handed him absolutely everything, while I earned absolutely everything. Marcus confirmed the acquisition was locked on his end. I applied my digital signature to the final document transferring majority shareholder control of Mr. Sterling's parent company directly to the elite Jada Experience Holding Group. It was officially done. I had systematically bought up their debt and acquired their controlling shares through a blind shell company over the last 6 months. As of this exact moment, I was legally the owner of the firm Malik was desperately trying to make partner at. My phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. She was playing her role perfectly, operating as my eyes inside the disaster zone. The photo she sent was a masterpiece of suburban tragedy. The camera angle captured the sprawling, sunken living room of my parents' house. 30 extremely wealthy, deeply irritated people were packed onto the white leather sectionals and standing rigidly by the fireplace. They were wearing their expensive winter coats inside, because the freak ice storm had caused a rolling blackout that temporarily knocked out the central heating system. Their faces were pinched with intense hunger and pure outrage. I zoomed in on the photo. Mr. Sterling was standing near the mantel holding a tiny paper plate. On that plate rested a single pathetic, partially defrosted fish stick and a broken Ritz cracker. The vein in his forehead was visibly pulsing. This was a man who commanded boardrooms in Manhattan and dined at exclusive private clubs in Dubai. Now he was trapped in a freezing suburban home being served absolute garbage by an employee he was evaluating for a multi-million-dollar partnership. Right in the center of the room stood Malik. He was positioned directly in front of my father's massive 85-inch television screen, holding a smart remote like a weapon. He was adjusting his silk tie, his chest puffed out, projecting the fake alpha energy he used to mask his absolute incompetence. He was literally staging the room, preparing to generously introduce his struggling little sister to his powerful boss. He was ready to play the benevolent corporate savior, while I took the full public fall for his catastrophic failure. He truly believed he was about to orchestrate a masterclass in gaslighting. The screen of my phone suddenly shifted from Keisha's photo to an incoming FaceTime request. The name Malik flashed across the glass. I took a slow sip of my Mai Tai, tasting the sweet pineapple and dark rum. I adjusted my designer sunglasses, blocking out the harsh morning glare. I made sure the background of my video feed perfectly framed the luxurious Hawaiian beachfront, the gently swaying palm trees, and the crystal-clear water of my private infinity pool. I wanted the visual contrast to be absolutely devastating. I took one last deep breath, letting the warm tropical air fill my lungs. Then I pressed the bright green accept button. The digital connection bridged the 4,000 miles instantly. My face flashed onto the 85-inch screen dominating the freezing Atlanta living room. The angry murmurs of 30 starving VIPs ceased immediately. Malik froze mid-sentence, his hand still hovering near his silk tie. The room fell entirely dead silent. The silence hanging over the FaceTime call was absolute. Through the digital feed on the 85-inch television screen, I could see the visible puffs of white breath escaping the mouths of the 30 freezing wealthy guests. The rolling blackout had plunged my parents' pristine suburban living room into a dark, icy cavern, illuminated only by the harsh glare of my face broadcasting from the screen. Behind me, the brilliant Hawaiian sun reflected off the crystal-clear waters of my private infinity pool, creating a jarring contrast to the absolute misery unfolding in Atlanta. Malik was the first to break the heavy silence. He quickly cleared his throat and forcibly smoothed his facial expression, transforming his sheer terror into a mask of manufactured authority. He squared his shoulders, puffed out his chest, and adopted his fake corporate voice. It was a deep, booming baritone that he exclusively used when he wanted to sound like a titan of industry, a voice entirely devoid of his actual personality. "Ah, there she is," Malik announced, projecting his voice so it echoed off the vaulted ceilings for the benefit of the VIP guests. "There is my brilliant little sister and junior partner. Jada, go ahead and tell Mr. Sterling about the slight catering delay we are experiencing due to the storm." Hearing him call me his junior partner while using that artificially deep voice sent a wave of profound disgust through my veins. Looking at his smug, forced smile transported me instantly back to my early 20s. It was the exact same tone he used during his lavish college fraternity galas and exclusive country club mixers. Back then, I would spend 72 hours straight on my feet covered in flour and burns, frantically executing flawless menus for his wealthy white friends completely free of charge. Malik would stroll into the kitchen wearing a tailored tuxedo, snap his fingers at me, and command me to fetch fresh towels for his guests. He treated my grinding 80-hour work weeks and my extraordinary culinary talent as a neat little party trick that he personally owned. He firmly believed that because he wore a suit and carried a leather briefcase, my grueling labor in commercial kitchens was inherently subservient to his networking events. I saw my parents standing rigidly in the shadows behind him. My mother, Yvonne, had her hands clasped together in desperate prayer. My father, Calvin, was glaring at the screen, silently demanding that I play my designated role. They were all holding their breath, waiting for me to shrink myself down, validate Malik's massive lie, and play the dutiful, invisible black woman saving her brother's precious career. I refused to say a single word. I simply sat back in my plush lounge chair, picked up my sweating glass, and took a slow, deliberate sip of my Mai Tai. The sharp clink of the ice cubes against the glass was picked up by my microphone and broadcasted loudly through my father's surround sound speakers. The sheer disrespect of my silence made Malik begin to visibly sweat through his expensive silk shirt. His fake smile began to violently twitch. Jada Malik hissed his corporate facade, cracking just a fraction. Tell them about the logistics issue right now. Before I could even formulate a response, the crowd of disgruntled guests parted. A tall, older white man with silver hair and a deeply flushed face pushed his way to the front of the room. It was Mr. Sterling, the billionaire CEO Malik had spent the last 2 years desperately trying to impress. He was wearing a heavy cashmere overcoat tightly wrapped around his shivering frame. In his right hand, he was furiously gripping a flimsy paper plate. Resting on the center of the plate was a single partially defrosted fish stick and a crumbled stale Ritz cracker. The vein pulsing on his forehead indicated he was entirely out of patience. Mr. Sterling did not greet me. He stepped directly in front of the camera, completely blocking Malik from my view. He glared at me through the screen, his eyes burning with the furious entitlement of a man who was used to absolute obedience. Jada, is it? Mr. Sterling barked, addressing me exactly the way a disappointed boss addresses a highly incompetent subordinate. I do not care about a slight delay. I care about professionalism and basic competence. Your brother assured me that his investment in the Elite Jada Experience Holding Group was a sound corporate strategy. He guaranteed that you ran the premier luxury hospitality agency in the entire American South. He told me that as your senior managing partner, he had personally overseen the logistics for this holiday retreat to ensure my family received a Michelin star experience. Mr. Sterling gestured aggressively to the freezing dark room around him. Yet I am standing in a house with no power, being served frozen fish sticks that taste like they were microwave heated by a toddler. My wife is shivering in the hallway, and my top investors are asking me why I brought them to a survival camp. As Malik's junior partner, you have a direct fiduciary responsibility to your investors. I demand to know why you completely abandoned your post and why my family is currently starving. If this is how you manage a simple holiday dinner, I have severe concerns about your brother's judgment in backing your little business. The profound condescension dripping from Mr. Sterling's mouth was the absolute perfect catalyst for what was about to happen next. He was talking to me exactly the way Malik and my parents always talked to me. He genuinely thought I was just a hired employee who had monumentally screwed up a basic catering gig. He fully believed that Malik held the purse strings, that Malik was the brains behind the operation, and that I was nothing more than the unreliable labor they had to manage. Malik popped his head back into the camera frame, standing slightly behind Mr. Sterling. His eyes were wide and manic, silently pleading with me to take the verbal beating, apologize profusely, and confirm his elaborate lie. He needed me to absorb the humiliation so he could maintain his golden image. I slowly set my cocktail glass down on the glass table. The warm Hawaiian breeze gently caught my hair, pushing it away from my face. I sat up, perfectly straight, aligning my posture with the ruthless executive authority I wielded every single day in actual corporate boardrooms. I casually reached up and adjusted my designer sunglasses, ensuring the dark lenses caught the reflection of the tropical sun. I looked directly into the camera lens, bypassing Malik completely and locking my gaze entirely onto Mr. Sterling's furious face. I allowed one final second of heavy, excruciating silence to fill the freezing Atlanta living room, making sure every single person in that house was hanging on to my next breath. I cleared my throat. The sound echoed through the surround sound speakers with crisp, terrifying clarity. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice dropping into a smooth, dangerously calm register that carried the absolute weight of a genuine billionaire CEO. There has been a massive misunderstanding. Malik is not my partner. The living room exploded. The heavy, suffocating silence shattered into a million pieces of frantic, chaotic noise. Malik let out a guttural sound that was half gasp and half scream. The polished, confident investment banker mask completely evaporated, revealing a terrified little boy caught in a monumental lie. He lunged forward, scrambling across the expensive Persian rug, desperately reaching for the smart remote resting on the glass coffee table. His only thought was to sever the digital connection to cut the video feed and silence the absolute truth before it could ruin his life. But Mr. Sterling did not become a billionaire CEO by being slow to react. He recognized the pure, unfiltered panic in Malik's eyes and instantly understood that he had been played. Without taking his eyes off the 85-inch screen, Mr. Sterling sharply snapped his fingers. Two massive men in precisely tailored dark suits, who had been standing quietly near the grand foyer, immediately sprang into action. Mr. Sterling's personal security detail crossed the room in 3 long strides. They intercepted Malik just as his fingers brushed the plastic casing of the remote. One bodyguard clamped a heavy hand down on Malik's shoulder, forcefully spinning him around, while the other physically stepped between Malik and the television. Malik struggled weakly, his expensive leather loafers slipping on the hardwood floor, but the bodyguards held him firmly in place, treating the supposed senior managing partner like a common trespasser. "Let her speak!" Mr. Sterling commanded, his voice cutting cleanly through the rising panic in the freezing room. He pointed a steady, authoritative finger at the television. "I want to hear exactly what she has to say." I leaned back in my plush lounge chair, adjusting my grip on my phone. The surround sound speakers in my parents' living room broadcasted my voice with perfect, crystal-clear authority. The audio quality was so sharp that the rhythmic sound of the Pacific Ocean waves crashing behind me echoed through their dark, icy house, creating a stark, brutal reminder of the untouchable distance between my reality and their current nightmare. "Mr. Sterling." I began, my tone entirely professional and devoid of any familial emotion. "I sincerely apologize for the spectacular lack of hospitality you are currently enduring. I assure you that the Elite Jada Experience Holding Group has absolutely zero involvement with this catastrophic dinner party. The man currently being restrained by your security team is my brother. He is a junior employee at your firm. He is not and has never been affiliated with my company in any capacity." Malik let out a pathetic whimpering sound, struggling against the bodyguard's vice-like grip. "It is a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking under the intense strain. "She is just angry. She is just a junior partner throwing a temper tantrum because we had a disagreement about profit sharing. Do not listen to her." I did not even blink. I kept my eyes locked on Mr. Sterling through the camera lens, refusing to acknowledge Malik's pathetic display. Over the past several weeks, I continued smoothly. My legal team has been conducting an extensive internal corporate audit. We discovered that your employee Malik has been systematically forging highly sensitive financial documents to secure a partner buy-in at your prestigious firm. He fabricated Schedule K-1 tax forms, he doctored capital contribution ledgers, and he outright forged my signature on fraudulent operating agreements. He presented himself to your due diligence committee as the primary financial backer and silent managing partner of my holding group. He used the very public success of my brand to manufacture a phantom portfolio for himself. The 30 VIP guests in the room began to loudly murmur among themselves. Some of the other wealthy executives from the firm were pulling out their smartphones, discreetly recording the entire humiliating spectacle from the shadows of the living room. "To be absolutely clear, Mr. Sterling," I said, enunciating every single syllable for maximum impact. "Malik owns 0% of my holding group. He has 0 voting rights. He has 0 equity. He does not sit on my board of directors. He has never contributed a single penny to my operating budget." While I was pulling consecutive 80-hour shifts building this hospitality empire from a single rented commercial kitchen, he was busy burning through my parents' retirement funds to finance his leased luxury cars and his country club memberships. Malik is living paycheck to paycheck, desperately trying to fund a fake alpha lifestyle he cannot afford. He could not purchase a single share of my company if he liquidated his entire existence. Mr. Sterling's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He turned his head slowly to look at Malik, who was now visibly shaking under the intense, wealthy scrutiny of the room. "You forged financial documents submitted to my firm," Mr. Sterling asked, his voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet whisper. "You leveraged a completely non-existent company to secure a $10 million promotion." Before Malik could stammer out a pathetic excuse, a high-pitched shriek pierced the audio feed. Chelsea burst through the crowd, shoving her way to the front of the room. The illusion of her perfect wealthy marriage was vaporizing before her very eyes, and she was entirely unequipped to handle the harsh reality. Her blonde hair was sticking to her damp forehead, and her expensive mascara was slightly smudged from her earlier crying fit in the coat closet. "Do not listen to her," Chelsea screamed, pointing a shaking manicured finger at the 85-inch screen. "She is lying. She is completely mentally unstable. She has always been extremely jealous of Malik. She is just a bitter ghetto dropout who fries chicken for a living. She is obsessed with ruining my husband because he is actually successful and she is nothing. She is making all of this up to embarrass us because she is deeply psychotic." Chelsea was panting, her chest heaving as she tried to project her shrill gaslighting over the murmurs of the wealthy guests. She truly believed that if she screamed loud enough, if she played the crazy, jealous sister card with enough conviction, the billionaire executives would simply write me off as a disgruntled, unstable relative trying to ruin a family gathering. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic, hysterical energy. I simply smiled. "Let us move away from empty, emotional accusations and look at hard, verifiable facts," I said. I tapped the screen of my phone, activating the digital screen share feature. Instantly, my face disappeared from the massive television in the Atlanta living room, replaced by high-resolution digital documents. The resolution was flawless, allowing every single person in the room to read the legal text clearly from their seats. I opened the official articles of incorporation that I had downloaded just minutes prior. "As you can see, Mr. Sterling," I narrated, navigating smoothly through the digital file. "This is the official corporate filing for the Elite Jada Experience Holding Group, registered with the Secretary of State." I highlighted the designated section on the screen with a digital marker. "I am listed as the founder, the sole managing member, and the chief executive officer." I swiped to the next document, pulling up the unredacted corporate capitalization table. "Here is the official cap table." I continued, my voice echoing through the freezing room with absolute authority. "Please note the explicit ownership distribution. It clearly states that I retain 100% sole ownership of all voting and non-voting shares. There are 0 outside investors. There are 0 silent partners. And there is absolutely no mention of Malik anywhere in the entire corporate structure." I swiped one more time, displaying the certified property deeds for the 5 commercial event venues my holding group currently owned outright. Every single deed was stamped, sealed, and registered exclusively under my corporate entity. Chelsea stared up at the massive screen, her mouth hanging open in stunned silence. The undeniable legal proof was written in black and white, illuminated brilliantly in the dark room. Her shrill accusations of my mental instability evaporated entirely. She slowly turned to look at Malik, realizing in real time that her husband was not a wealthy corporate titan, but a desperate fraud facing severe federal charges. The guests were no longer just murmuring, they were openly expressing their disgust. I heard one of the executive wives loudly state that they needed to leave this pathetic scam of a house immediately. Mr. Sterling stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the digital evidence, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. He was calculating the sheer magnitude of the fraud Malik had attempted to pull on his investment board and the legal repercussions that would follow. Suddenly, the camera violently jerked. The screen share ended, and my face popped back onto the 85-inch television. My father, Calvin, had shoved his way to the front of the room, bypassing the security guards. He looked absolutely deranged. His perfectly tailored suit was rumpled, and his eyes were bulging with a toxic mixture of profound humiliation and uncontrollable rage. The horrifying realization that he had just signed away his sprawling suburban mansion, his life savings, and his pristine reputation to fund a criminal enterprise had finally shattered his righteous deacon facade. He glared at the television screen, his chest heaving as he stared at me, relaxing in the tropical Hawaiian sun. He did not care about the objective truth. He did not care that his son was a confirmed criminal. He only cared that I had actively refused to submit to his authority and save his precious social standing. "You ungrateful, wicked girl!" Calvin screamed, his booming voice vibrating the surround sound speakers. "You are destroying your brother's career. You are destroying this entire family." I took a slow sip of my drink, feeling the warm ocean breeze blow softly across my skin. I looked directly into my father's furious, panicking eyes and smiled a cold, brilliant smile. "I haven't even started yet." The silence following my words was thick enough to choke on. Calvin stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, unable to process the absolute defiance radiating from the 85-inch screen. I did not give him the luxury of recovering his composure or attempting another pathetic bellow of patriarchal authority. I tapped my screen again, ending the screen share of the property deeds and pulling up a brand new, fully executed legal document. It bore the unmistakable crest of the federal corporate registrar, the heavy watermark of my holding group, and the bold, undeniable signatures of a massive international board of directors. To drive the point home, I picked up the physical leather-bound copy of the exact same contract from the glass table beside me and held it up to the camera. "This," I said, my voice cutting through the icy Atlanta living room like a freshly sharpened scalpel, "is not just a rejection of Malik's pathetic fabricated partnership proposal." I zoomed the digital camera in on the primary clauses, making sure the high-definition display captured every single word for the VIP guests to read. "For the last 6 months, Malik has been systematically uploading my proprietary financial data into his firm's secure servers. He was attempting to pass off my massive profit margins and real estate holdings as his own generated capital. He thought I was too busy frying chicken and managing serving staff to monitor my own digital security infrastructure. He thought he could leverage my corporate identity to secure his own promotion. Instead of quietly shutting him down, I continued watching Malik sink onto a leather ottoman, his head in his hands, his fake alpha posture entirely collapsed. I let him dig his own grave. I let him submit those fraudulent documents to your due diligence committee. And I used the digital trail he blindly created to trace exactly where my data was going. I shifted my gaze back to Calvin. The furious patriarch was now sweating profusely despite the freezing temperature of the room. The realization of his impending financial doom was finally piercing his colossal ego. The second mortgage, the liquidated retirement accounts, the leveraged pension, it was all evaporating before his eyes. "Do you remember the night I moved out, Dad?" I asked. The question hung in the freezing room, halting the frantic whispers of the wealthy guests. I had just lost my first major catering contract because I could not secure a commercial loan for industrial equipment. I asked you to co-sign for a measly $15,000. You looked me up and down, scoffed, and told me that failures do not belong in this family. Calvin swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. He could not look away from the screen. "You told me to pack my bags," I said, my voice steady, entirely devoid of the desperate hurt that had once consumed me. "You said I was an embarrassment, a ghetto dropout who would never amount to anything more than a glorified maid for wealthy people. You took that $15,000 and used it to buy Malik a vintage Rolex to celebrate his entry-level desk job. You starved me out, hoping the harsh reality of the business world would break me so I would crawl back and beg for your conditional approval." Yvonne was openly sobbing now, clutching her chest as she realized the full weight of their absolute ruin. They had bet their entire suburban kingdom on a son who was currently hyperventilating on a leather ottoman. "I did not crawl back," I stated firmly, staring down the man who had tried to break my spirit. "I took that rejection and I weaponized it. I built an empire that generates more revenue in a single fiscal quarter than your golden son has earned in his entire miserable life. I flipped the script entirely. I went from the family scapegoat to the absolute undisputed owner of my destiny. And you gambled your house, your retirement, and your legacy on a man who cannot even boil tap water without a step-by-step tutorial." You backed a fraud and now you will pay the price. Chelsea was hyperventilating, sliding down the wall until she sat on the hardwood floor in a crumpled heap of designer fabric. The illusion of her perfect, wealthy marriage had vaporized. She looked at Malik with pure, unadulterated hatred, realizing her country club status was completely dead. The rich VIP guests were entirely captivated watching the spectacular implosion of the Wilson family legacy like a live theater performance. But my primary target was no longer my broken family. I shifted my focus entirely. I looked straight at Mr. Sterling. The billionaire CEO was standing perfectly still, his eyes locked on the screen, his mind rapidly calculating the massive corporate liability he had just invited into his living room. He was a man accustomed to holding all the cards, and he was slowly realizing he was holding a hand of dust. "Mr. Sterling," I said, dropping the family drama entirely and adopting the cold, clinical tone of an apex corporate predator. "When my cybersecurity team alerted me that your firm was housing my stolen financial data, I did not just send a standard cease and desist letter. I initiated a full-scale forensic audit of your entire corporate structure." Mr. Sterling stiffened. The color drained completely from his flushed face. He recognized the tone. He knew exactly what a forensic audit from a highly capitalized hostile entity implied. "During our investigation into your firm's due diligence protocols, or rather your spectacular lack thereof, my team uncovered something absolutely fascinating." I continued, enjoying the absolute terror blossoming in his eyes. "We discovered that your parent company was dangerously over-leveraged. We found that your board of directors was deeply dissatisfied with your recent quarterly projections and your aggressive expansion strategies. We found a massive vulnerability. The 30 VIP guests, many of whom were investors and senior executives within Sterling's firm, began whispering frantically to each other. The atmosphere in the room violently shifted from irritation over frozen fish sticks to absolute corporate panic. They were realizing that the woman on the screen was not a catering vendor, but a financial leviathan. "I spent the last 6 months aggressively acquiring your parent company's debt through a series of blind shell corporations," I explained, leaning forward, ensuring my face filled the entirety of their screen. "I bought out your dissatisfied shareholders. I secured the controlling voting rights. I did not just reject Malik's fake partnership proposal. I swallowed your entire operation whole." I let the silence build again. It was a suffocating, heavy silence that pressed down on every single person in that freezing Atlanta house. Malik was rocking back and forth, crying silently. Calvin was staring at his own hands, completely broken and humiliated in front of the very society he worshipped. Yvonne was wailing into her husband's shoulder, mourning the loss of her mansion. But the most satisfying reaction was Mr. Sterling's. The man who had addressed me as a subordinate, who had demanded an explanation for his ruined dinner, was standing paralyzed. He was realizing his entire empire had just been dismantled by the woman he had dismissed as hired help just 5 minutes ago. I dropped the ultimate hammer. "Mr. Sterling, my holding group finalized the acquisition of your firm's parent company yesterday morning. I am not Malik's junior partner." Mr. Sterling's jaw dropped. His mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. The arrogant billionaire was completely speechless, his entire reality shattering in real time on a massive television screen. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice slicing through the digital connection with lethal finality. "As of 9 a.m. yesterday, I am the majority shareholder of the firm you both work for. I am your new boss." The living room descended into absolute chaos. The collective gasp from the 30 wealthy VIPs sucked whatever remaining oxygen existed in that freezing dark space. The sheer magnitude of my statement hung heavily in the frigid air, illuminated only by the harsh, bright glow of my face, broadcasting from the massive 85-inch television screen. Through the digital feed, I could actually see the visible puffs of white breath escaping the shocked mouths of the executives as they stared at me. The rolling blackout had plunged my parents' pristine suburban living room into an icy cavern, creating a stark, brutal visual contrast to the brilliant Hawaiian sun, reflecting off the crystal-clear waters of my private infinity pool behind me. Yvonne could no longer process the terrifying reality crashing down around her. The horrifying realization that she had blindly handed over the deed to her prized suburban mansion to fund a monumental criminal lie finally broke her fragile psychological defenses. The country club luncheons, the designer church hats, the arrogant social climbing, it was all completely gone. She let out a high-pitched, breathless keen, her eyes rolling back into her head as her knees buckled entirely. She collapsed backward, fainting dead away onto the expensive white leather sectional. Calvin dropped heavily to his knees beside her, frantically slapping her cheeks and screaming for someone to bring a glass of water. Not a single person in the room moved to help him. The wealthy guests simply stepped back, actively distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Wilson family implosion. Malik was completely shattered. The facade of the confident, untouchable investment banker vanished, leaving behind a terrified, sniveling child. His legs gave out completely. He fell hard onto his knees on the Persian rug, clutching his chest as he stared up at my digital image. His custom-tailored suit was wrinkled, his silk tie loosened and askew. He began to beg. He clasped his hands together in a posture of desperate prayer, tears streaming freely down his face. He pleaded with the screen, begging me to reconsider, begging me to think about our shared blood, pleading for mercy in front of the very executives he had just tried to swindle. I ignored his pathetic weeping. My eyes bypassed him entirely and found Chelsea. She was standing frozen near the hallway, her face entirely drained of color. Her manufactured high society persona was crumbling into dust before my very eyes. She looked around the room, making eye contact with the wealthy executive wives she had spent the entire evening trying to impress, only to find them staring back at her with sheer, unfiltered disgust. She was no longer a wealthy elite. She was the wife of an unemployed, soon-to-be indicted fraud. "Chelsea!" I said, my voice carrying cleanly through the surround sound speakers, cutting effortlessly through Malik's loud sobs. "I want you to look very closely at my screen. Look at the beachfront property behind me. Look at the massive empire I built with my own two hands. Do you remember the catering event I hosted for your country club bridal shower 3 years ago?" Chelsea flinched, physically backing away from the television screen as if my words were striking her. She tried to open her mouth to speak, but her throat was completely dry. "You cornered me in the kitchen while I was plating hors d'oeuvres for 50 of your snobby friends." I continued, my tone dangerously calm and perfectly level. "You looked me up and down, sneered at my flour-dusted clothes, and told me that women like me belonged in a plain black uniform. You said it was a biological imperative that I serve women like you, women who were smart enough to secure a wealthy corporate provider. You built your entire identity on the illusion of my brother's success. You thought his stolen prestige gave you the right to treat me like hired help." I smiled, taking another slow sip of my tropical drink. "Well, Chelsea, the illusion is officially dead. Your husband does not have a wealthy provider to rely on anymore. In fact, he does not even have a paycheck. Since the bank will inevitably be foreclosing on your house and my parents' mansion by the end of the month, I suggest you go find that plain black uniform. You are going to need it to pay your rent. You can wear the apron while you pack your designer bags." Malik tried to crawl closer to the screen. "Jada, please." He choked out, his voice a wet, ragged mess. "You made your point. You embarrassed us. You won. Now please stop. I will resign quietly. I will walk away. Just do not ruin my life. I am your brother." I shifted my posture, leaning forward and placing my elbows on my knees. I looked past Malik, focusing entirely on Mr. Sterling and the 30 VIP guests who were watching the spectacle with rapt attention. I was no longer a sister dealing with petty family drama. I was an apex corporate predator addressing a room full of my newly acquired assets. "Dad," I said, addressing Calvin, who was still kneeling beside my unconscious mother. "Do you remember what you told me the night you threw my business plan in the garbage? You looked me in the eye and told me that failures do not belong in this family. You demanded absolute perfection and absolute submission. You set the rules of this toxic game. I am simply enforcing them. I turned my unyielding gaze back to the center of the screen. Mr. Sterling, as the new majority shareholder of this holding group, I am exercising my executive authority effective immediately. I projected my voice, ensuring every syllable landed with lethal precision. Malik Wilson, you are formally terminated from this firm. Your dismissal is not a quiet resignation. You are being fired for gross corporate fraud, severe financial embezzlement, and the deliberate malicious misrepresentation of corporate assets to international investors. You utilized company servers to forge proprietary documents, and you attempted to leverage stolen financial data to manipulate your way into a partnership you absolutely did not earn. I watched Malik bury his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently. You will receive no severance package, I stated coldly. Your stock options, if you even possessed any real ones, are voided. My legal team has already forwarded the complete, unredacted forensic audit of your activities to the federal authorities and the SEC. You will be facing severe criminal charges for wire fraud and corporate espionage. The millions of dollars of fake equity you promised this firm have vanished, and you are walking out of this freezing house with absolutely nothing. Mr. Sterling, I continued, my tone commanding and absolute. I expect you to have your personal security detail strip this former employee of his company issued mobile devices, his secure access badges, and his corporate credit cards before you leave this premises. He is a massive security liability, and he is no longer authorized to access any of our internal networks. The absolute authority in my voice washed over the freezing room, leaving zero room for argument or negotiation. Mr. Sterling stood perfectly still, absorbing the raw, unapologetic display of power. He was a ruthless businessman who recognized and respected a true corporate titan when he saw one. He did not care about the Wilson family dynamics. He cared about strength, capital, and survival. He looked at the 85-inch screen, observing the relaxed, wealthy woman sitting under the Hawaiian sun who had just outmaneuvered his entire board of directors. A slow, respectful nod of pure submission formed on Mr. Sterling's face. He accepted my absolute authority. He slowly turned his head to look down at Malik, who was still sobbing on the Persian rug. Mr. Sterling's face twisted with utter, unfiltered disgust. He looked at Malik like he was a piece of rotting garbage sticking to the bottom of his expensive shoe. He stepped directly over my groveling brother, completely ignoring his existence. Mr. Sterling turned his back on my devastated parents and faced his shivering wife and the rest of the shocked, silent VIP guests. "Get your coats," he ordered, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "We are leaving." The command from Mr. Sterling acted as the absolute final nail in the coffin of the Wilson family legacy. The second those words left the billionaire's mouth, the entire living room transformed into a chaotic, frantic evacuation zone. 30 of the wealthiest and most influential executives in the city collectively decided that standing outside in a brutal, historic Atlanta ice storm was infinitely preferable to spending another single second inside that radioactive house. A massive wave of movement erupted in the dark, freezing room. The synchronized rustling of expensive silk dresses, heavy wool slacks, and tailored cashmere coats filled the air. There were no polite goodbyes. There were no courteous handshakes or promises to reschedule. These were ruthless corporate sharks who understood that Malik was no longer just an incompetent host. He was a confirmed federal criminal facing an SEC investigation, and any proximity to him was a direct threat to their own portfolios. I sat comfortably in my lounge chair under the warm Hawaiian sun, watching the entire spectacular exodus unfold in high definition on my phone screen. The camera angle from the 85-inch television perfectly captured the foyer where the panicked guests were now bottlenecking at the front door. The heavy mahogany door was violently thrown open. A brutal gust of freezing wind carrying sharp, stinging crystals of ice immediately blasted into the house. The fierce wind instantly extinguished the few decorative candles my mother had set up, completely plunging the living room into deep, impenetrable shadows. Through the surround sound speakers, I could hear the panicked, urgent whispers of the guests as they fled. They were already pulling out their cell phones in the dark, desperately dialing their personal attorneys and wealth managers, instructing them to immediately sever any and all professional ties with Malik's firm. They were stepping over each other, slipping on the iced, over front steps, pulling their shivering wives and husbands into the brutal winter night, completely ignoring the fact that they had not eaten a single bite of food. The sheer indignity of 30 starving VIPs fleeing a suburban mansion into a blackout was a masterpiece of poetic justice. Seeing his entire social and financial universe walking out the front door finally snapped Calvin out of his paralyzed state of shock. The realization that he was about to be left alone with his massive unpayable debt, his ruined reputation, and his fraudulent son triggered a terrifying primal panic. Calvin scrambled to his feet, his knees cracking loudly in the cold. He shoved his way past the fleeing guests, wildly swinging his arms as he sprinted toward the foyer. He completely abandoned decades of carefully curated arrogance. He threw away the pristine, untouchable megachurch deacon persona he had used to terrorize and belittle me my entire life. "Mr. Sterling," Calvin screamed, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Wait, you cannot leave like this. Please, you have to listen to me." Calvin lunged forward and physically grabbed the sleeve of Mr. Sterling's heavy cashmere overcoat. It was a massive, monumental mistake. The billionaire's two towering bodyguards reacted instantly. One bodyguard stepped forward and brutally shoved Calvin squarely in the chest. The force of the blow sent my father stumbling backward, his expensive leather shoes losing traction on the hardwood floor. He crashed hard into the decorative entryway table, sending a heavy crystal vase shattering to the ground. Calvin did not even try to stand back up. He simply rolled onto his hands and knees, completely prostrating himself on the floor, covered in broken glass. The man who had stood at the church pulpit every single Sunday, looking down his nose at his congregation, preaching about divine favor and the inherent virtue of wealth, was now groveling like a desperate beggar. "Please, Mr. Sterling," Calvin pleaded, tears streaming down his face, his voice echoing pathetically over the howling wind outside. "I put everything into Malik's partnership. I took out a second mortgage on this house. I drained my retirement. I even leveraged the community outreach funds from the church. If you fire him, we lose absolutely everything. The bank will take the house. The congregation will throw me out. I will be ruined. Please, I beg of you. I will work for free. Malik will scrub your floors. Just do not call the federal authorities. Do not let that ungrateful girl ruin us." Mr. Sterling paused at the threshold of the open front door. The freezing wind was whipping his silver hair around his face, but his expression remained carved from solid ice. He looked down at Calvin groveling in the shattered crystal and shook his head in absolute disgust. "You are a pathetic excuse for a man, Calvin," Mr. Sterling said, his voice cutting cleanly through the howling storm. "You stole from your own church to finance a corporate fraud, and you still have the audacity to blame the daughter who actually built a legitimate empire. You are an accessory to multiple federal felonies. If you or your criminal son ever attempt to contact me or my firm again, my personal legal team will ensure you both rot in a federal penitentiary for the rest of your natural lives." With that final devastating ruling, Mr. Sterling turned his back on my father, stepped out into the freezing Atlanta ice storm, and pulled the heavy mahogany door shut behind him. The loud, echoing slam of the front door vibrated through my phone's audio feed. The sudden, absolute silence that followed was deafening. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my Mai Tai, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The sound was broadcasted loudly through their dark living room, a sharp, mocking reminder of my presence. The camera feed provided a pristine view of the absolute carnage. Calvin was still on his hands and knees, weeping into the hardwood floor. Yvonne was unconscious on the white leather sectional, her designer church hat knocked askew. Malik was completely catatonic, rocking back and forth on the Persian rug, with his face buried in his hands. Suddenly, a figure stepped directly in front of the camera lens, completely blocking the view of the ruined family. It was Keisha, my fiercely independent and deeply cynical cousin. She was the only person in that entire house who had never bought into Malik's manufactured hype. She was wearing a heavy, oversized parka, her designer handbag slung securely over her shoulder. She leaned in close to the camera, her face illuminated by the bright glare of the television screen. She looked directly at me, her eyes shining with pure, unfiltered respect. She slowly raised her hands and began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate, rhythmic clap that echoed loudly through the silent, dead house. Each clap sounded like a gunshot in the dark room. Jada Keisha said, a massive, satisfied grin spreading across her face. I always knew you were the only real one in this entire fake family. You really just burned their whole kingdom to the ground without even leaving the beach. Legendary. Keisha gave me one final respectful nod before turning around. She casually stepped right over Malik's trembling body, navigated around Calvin's sobbing form, and walked straight out the front door, letting it click firmly shut behind her. She did not look back once. The house was now completely dead. The ambient hum of the television screen was the only source of light in the freezing room. The 30 VIP guests, the caterers, the security detail, and the extended family were all completely gone. The only people left in the sprawling dark mansion were the four individuals who had spent their entire lives making me feel like an insignificant failure. I sat back in my chair, enjoying the pristine quiet. I watched Chelsea slowly push herself up from the floor. Her knees were trembling violently. Her perfect blonde blowout was ruined. Her makeup was running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks, and her breathing was shallow and erratic. She looked at my father sobbing on the floor. She looked at my mother passed out on the couch. Finally, she looked down at Malik. She stared at the man she had married solely for his perceived proximity to power and wealth. The horrifying reality was finally processing in her mind. The $10 million promotion was a hallucination. The country club memberships were gone. The luxury cars were going to be repossessed. Her husband was not a senior managing partner. He was an unemployed fraud facing severe federal prison time. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her entire fake high society life was completely obliterated. There was no money, there was no prestige, there was no job, there was only massive crushing debt and impending federal indictments. Chelsea took a deep, shaky breath, her eyes widening as pure panic completely overtook her system. She kicked Malik's leg, forcing him to look up at her. I want a divorce. Chelsea's furious demand for a divorce echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the freezing living room. The sheer venom in her voice acted as a physical blow to Malik. He reached out with trembling hands, trying to grasp the hem of her designer coat, but she violently kicked his hand away. She did not look at him with the pity of a betrayed wife. She looked at him with the cold, calculating rage of a woman whose financial safety net had just been ripped away. She pulled out her phone, using the harsh glare of the flashlight feature to navigate through the dark room toward the grand staircase. She was going upstairs to pack her bags, and she was leaving him with nothing but his impending federal indictments, just as Malik let out a pathetic wail, begging Chelsea to come back. The final remnants of the neighborhood power grid surrendered to the historic Atlanta ice storm. The backup battery system that had been keeping the internet router and the television screen alive gave a sharp, high-pitched beep. The massive 85-inch screen flickered violently. The few emergency lights in the hallway completely shorted out. The rolling blackout transitioned into an absolute catastrophic grid failure. The pristine suburban mega mansion was plunged into total impenetrable darkness. The sudden loss of the digital glow from the television made the pitch-black room feel significantly colder. The heavy mahogany doors and the double-paned windows were no match for the brutal winter storm howling outside. Without the central heating system running, the temperature inside the house plummeted rapidly. I could hear the wind aggressively rattling the window frames, a harsh screaming sound that perfectly underscored the total devastation of the Wilson family legacy. Through the fading connection on my phone screen, I could barely make out the shadowy figures of my relatives. Calvin's phone battery was flashing a harsh red warning light, casting a weak crimson glow over his horrified face. He was staring at the blank television screen, his breath forming thick white clouds in the freezing air. The reality of their situation was finally settling heavily onto his shoulders. There were no caterers left to prepare a meal. The private chefs had packed up their premium ingredients and fled. The second Mr. Sterling ordered the mass exodus. The only food left in the entire sprawling mansion was the plate of partially defrosted fish sticks and stale crackers sitting abandoned on the coffee table. They were completely isolated, trapped in an ice storm with absolutely zero resources. More importantly, Calvin was realizing the catastrophic financial ruin he had willingly brought upon himself. He had staked his entire megachurch deacon persona on Malik's manufactured success. He had taken out a massive second mortgage on the very house they were currently freezing in to provide Malik with the fake capital needed to impress the investment board. He had liquidated his and Yvonne's entire retirement portfolios to lease Malik's luxury vehicles and pay for his exclusive country club memberships. Calvin had financed a lie, and now the lie was dead. The bank would be initiating foreclosure proceedings the moment the markets opened on Monday morning. The mega-church congregation he had spent decades terrorizing and judging would strip him of his deacon title the second the fraud charges went public. He had absolutely nothing left. Jada Calvin whispered, his voice trembling in the dark. His face was illuminated only by the dying red battery light of his smartphone. "Please, you have to help us. We have no heat. We have no food. We are freezing. I am your father. You cannot just leave us here like this." I sat back in my plush lounge chair on the balcony of my Hawaiian suite. The warm, tropical sun was just beginning to set, painting the Pacific sky in brilliant shades of gold and deep purple. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the sweet scent of hibiscus and ocean salt fill my lungs. I looked at the pathetic, desperate face of the man who had spent my entire life trying to break my spirit. "I am not leaving you anywhere, Dad," I replied, my voice completely calm and perfectly steady. "I am simply returning the exact energy you have given me for the past 30 years. Calvin opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off immediately. My tone left absolutely zero room for negotiation. "You demanded respect and obedience while actively sabotaging my future," I said, projecting my voice so every single word landed like a physical strike. "You built this entire suburban empire on my back. When you hosted your massive mega-church galas to impress the other deacons, you told everyone you hired a luxury catering firm. You lied to your entire congregation. It was me standing in that damp basement kitchen for 3 days straight, sleeping on bags of flour, cooking for hundreds of people for absolutely free. When Yvonne needed to win her ridiculous country club bake-offs to maintain her social standing, she stole my proprietary recipes and claimed them as her own." I heard Yvonne let out a soft, muffled sob from the dark sofa. She was awake but entirely paralyzed by the humiliation of her exposed lies. "You paraded Malik around as a financial genius," I continued mercilessly. "You bought him tailored suits and luxury watches, while I begged you to co-sign a miserable $15,000 business loan so I could buy commercial equipment. You looked at me standing in my flour-stained apron, and you called me a failure. You told me I did not belong in your perfect, wealthy family. You thought I was your beast of burden. You thought my only purpose on this earth was to labor in the shadows so Malik could shine in the spotlight." The battery light on Calvin's phone began to blink faster, indicating the connection was seconds away from completely dying. "But beasts of burden eventually realize they are much stronger than the weak, pathetic masters holding the whip," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I took your rejection and I used it to build a multinational holding group. I used my bare hands to forge an empire, while you used your megachurch money to forge tax documents. You built a house of cards on a foundation of lies, and you used my stolen labor to prop it up. Now the cards have collapsed." "Jada, please," Calvin begged, tears finally breaking and streaming down his cheeks. "Without me," I stated, delivering the absolute final blow, "you are just a broke, disgraced old man, sitting in a freezing dark house with a fraudulent son and a mountain of unpayable debt. You are a failure, Calvin, and failures do not belong in my family." I did not wait for his response. I did not want to hear another pathetic excuse or another desperate plea for mercy. I firmly pressed the red button on my screen. The digital connection severed instantly. The FaceTime feed vanished, replacing the dark, freezing Atlanta living room with my own reflection on the black glass of my phone screen. I stared at myself for a long, silent moment. The heavy, suffocating weight of my childhood, the decades of gaslighting, the relentless emotional abuse, the grinding exhaustion of trying to prove my worth to people who were utterly incapable of loving me, it all simply evaporated into the warm Hawaiian air. I was completely free. I physically powered down my smartphone, holding the side button until the screen went entirely black. I tossed the useless piece of technology onto the glass patio table. I did not need to hear from them ever again. The Wilson family was dead to me. I picked up the heavy brass telephone resting on the table and dialed the resort's concierge desk. I ordered a massive, decadent room service feast. I ordered macadamia nut-crusted mahi-mahi, a massive portion of truffle mashed potatoes, butter-poached asparagus, and another freshly mixed Mai Tai. I was celebrating the absolute, undisputed ownership of my own life. I stood up from my lounge chair and walked to the edge of my private infinity pool. The water was perfectly heated, cascading over the stone edge and blending seamlessly with the massive Pacific Ocean stretching out before me. I closed my eyes and listened to the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shoreline. There was no screaming. There was no gaslighting. There was only absolute pristine peace. Fast forward, exactly 3 months. The floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office in downtown Manhattan offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city skyline. I was seated behind a massive slab of polished obsidian that served as my executive desk, reviewing the final integration documents for the acquisition of Mr. Sterling's former parent company. The transition had been ruthless, swift, and highly profitable. Malik was currently awaiting federal trial, facing a mountain of insurmountable evidence, while the SEC dismantled whatever remained of his fake corporate portfolio. I signed my name and the bottom of the final contract, sealing my total dominance over the firm. The heavy frosted glass door to my office clicked open. My executive assistant Sarah stepped quietly into the room. She was holding a sleek digital tablet, her expression a mixture of professional composure and deep concern. She walked up to my desk and waited for me to set my custom fountain pen down. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice hushed but urgent. "I apologize for the interruption, but there is a situation developing at the front reception desk." I looked up, adjusting my designer glasses. "What kind of situation?" Sarah tapped the screen of her tablet, pulling up the live security feed from the ground floor lobby of our corporate headquarters. "Your parents are downstairs in the lobby," Sarah replied, keeping her eyes locked on the security footage. "They are carrying several large suitcases, and they are absolutely refusing to leave the premises." I stared at the high-definition security feed on Sarah's tablet. The digital display captured every pathetic detail of the scene unfolding 70 floors below us. Calvin and Yvonne were standing in the center of my pristine white marble lobby, looking like completely foreign entities in a world built entirely on ruthless corporate efficiency. They were surrounded by 4 of my towering security contractors, who were keeping them securely cordoned off from the executive elevators. "Have the guards physically remove them?" Sarah suggested, her tone strictly professional as she monitored the feed. "I can have local law enforcement cite them for trespassing if they resist." "No," I said, slowly sliding my custom fountain pen into the pocket of my tailored blazer. "Do not call the police. I will handle this myself." I bypassed my assistant and walked out of my corner office, making my way down the quiet carpeted corridor toward the private executive elevator. The heavy brushed steel doors parted silently at my approach. I stepped inside the glass-walled carriage and pressed the button for the lobby. As the elevator began its rapid descent down the side of the Manhattan skyscraper, I watched the sprawling concrete jungle of the city blur past me. I was descending from the untouchable heights of my corporate kingdom to deal with the ghosts of my past, but I was no longer the frightened, desperate girl they had starved out of their house. I was the apex predator, descending into the valley. The elevator doors chimed and slid open to reveal the expansive ground floor of the holding group headquarters. The lobby was a masterpiece of intimidating modern architecture, featuring towering 30-foot ceilings, polished Italian marble, and massive obsidian pillars. It was an environment specifically designed to make visitors feel small. It was clearly working. Calvin and Yvonne looked completely swallowed by the sheer scale of the building. The arrogant megachurch deacon and the snooty country club socialite were entirely gone. The physical transformation they had undergone in just 3 months was staggering. Calvin was no longer wearing his custom-tailored Italian wool suits. He was dressed in an ill-fitting off-the-rack gray blazer that hung loosely over his slumped shoulders. His posture, which used to project absolute patriarchal dominance, was heavily hunched, making him look 10 years older and completely defeated. Yvonne looked even worse. The flawless, expensive blonde blowouts and designer silk dresses had been replaced by a cheap, neutral-colored raincoat and a messy, brittle bun. The haughty, arrogant glow of suburban mega wealth had completely drained from her face, leaving behind deep, hollow stress lines and dark, exhausted shadows under her eyes. Clustered around their feet were 3 large, heavily scuffed suitcases. As I stepped out of the elevator and walked across the echoing marble floor, their eyes instantly locked onto me. Calvin physically flinched when he saw me. He took in my impeccable designer suit, my confident, unyielding posture, and the absolute authority radiating from my presence. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to die in his throat as my security detail immediately parted to let me through. Stepping back respectfully the second I raised my hand. "Jada," my mother gasped, her voice weak and trembling. She took a hesitant step forward, her hands nervously wringing the fabric of her cheap coat. "Thank God. They would not let us up to your office. You have to tell these guards who we are." I stopped a deliberate 10 feet away from them, maintaining a sterile professional distance. I did not offer a greeting. I did not offer a hug. I simply stared at them, letting the freezing temperature of my gaze chill them to the bone. "Who you are is entirely irrelevant to my security team," I stated, my voice echoing crisply off the marble walls. "The only thing that matters is that you are trespassing in a commercial building without an appointment." Calvin bristled, his old, deeply ingrained instincts momentarily overriding his current desperation. "Do not speak to your mother like that." He snapped, his voice attempting to find its old booming cadence, but ultimately cracking under the strain. "We are your parents. We traveled all the way from Atlanta to see you. We had to take a Greyhound bus because we could not afford the airfare." I slowly crossed my arms over my chest. "A Greyhound bus," I repeated, feigning mild corporate interest. "How tragically poetic. I assume that means the bank officially finalized the foreclosure on the mega mansion this morning." Calvin's face flushed a deep, humiliated crimson. The brutal confirmation of their total financial ruin hung heavily in the pristine lobby. "It is gone," Yvonne sobbed openly, burying her face in her hands. "Everything is completely gone, Jada. The bank locked the doors yesterday. They took the cars. They took my jewelry. The church board voted to revoke your father's deacon status the second the fraud indictments hit the local news. We have absolutely nowhere to go. All of our friends stopped answering our calls. We are completely destitute." "And Malik?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Surely your brilliant golden child stepped up to provide for the family he so recklessly destroyed." The mention of his precious son's name caused Calvin to physically wince. "Malik cannot help us," Calvin muttered, his eyes dropping to the polished marble floor. "His assets are completely frozen by the federal government. The SEC legally blacklisted him from the entire financial sector." "Yes, I am fully aware of the federal mandates," I replied, my tone clinical and completely devoid of sympathy. I was the one who provided the unredacted digital audit that secured his permanent ban. But surely a man of his immense manufactured talents could secure alternative employment to shelter his displaced parents. "He is working the midnight graveyard shift at a mid-tier used Kia dealership in Marietta," Calvin admitted, his voice dropping to an agonizingly humiliating whisper. "It is the only place that would hire him with a pending felony fraud trial hanging over his head. He is living in a cheap motel by the highway." "And Chelsea?" I pushed further, mercilessly dissecting their ruined reality. Where is the dutiful, supportive wife who told me I belonged in a plain black uniform? She left him. Yvonne cried out, her voice echoing shrilly in the massive lobby. She served him divorce papers the exact same week the federal agents raided his office. She did not just leave Jada. She liquidated the last remaining joint checking account and took the remaining cash. She abandoned him the second the money disappeared. I absorbed the phenomenal summary of their karmic destruction without blinking. The universe had executed a flawless balancing of the scales. Malik was a disgraced criminal working the lowest possible retail shift. Chelsea had proven herself to be the ultimate transactional parasite. And my parents, the architects of my childhood misery, were homeless and begging in the lobby of the very empire they had actively tried to sabotage. "So you dragged your luggage to Manhattan," I said, gesturing to the pathetic scuffed suitcases resting by their feet. "You expected to waltz into my corporate headquarters and simply demand a luxury bailout. You assumed I would put you up in a penthouse suite and write you a blank check to rebuild the suburban kingdom you lost funding a criminal." "We are not asking for a penthouse," Calvin pleaded, taking another desperate step forward, the remaining fragments of his pride entirely shattered. "We just need a bailout, Jada. We need you to pay off the defaulted second mortgage so we can get the house back. You have the money. We see your name in the financial papers. You own this entire building. A few $1 million is absolutely nothing to you now. You can afford to save us." When logic and entitlement failed, Calvin immediately resorted to his favorite weapon. He shifted into his mega-church manipulative preacher persona, attempting to weaponize religion against me. "God commands you to honor your mother and father." Calvin preached, his voice taking on a desperate rhythmic cadence. "The scripture demands grace and Christian charity. We made mistakes, Jada, but we are your flesh and blood. We sacrificed our youth to raise you. You cannot turn your back on your own family in their darkest hour. It is a sin to hoard your wealth while your parents suffer on the street. The Lord requires you to show forgiveness." Yvonne nodded frantically, wiping the running mascara from her cheeks. "Please, Jada, have some mercy. We have learned our lesson. We have absolutely nothing left. We just need you to be the bigger person and save us." I stood perfectly still, letting their pathetic, desperate manipulation wash over me. They were not sorry for the decades of emotional abuse. They were not sorry for starving me out of their house. They were only sorry that their golden son had failed and that I was the only person left with a checkbook large enough to rescue them from the consequences of their own toxic choices. I looked at Calvin, stripping away the final layer of his religious hypocrisy. "You love to quote scripture when you are the one holding the collection plate." "Dad," I said, my voice dropping into a smooth, dangerously cold register that silenced the entire lobby. "But you seem to conveniently forget the most fundamental biblical principle of them all. You reap exactly what you sow." Calvin's jaw trembled, his eyes widening as he realized his spiritual manipulation was completely useless. "You sowed greed, favoritism, and absolute cruelty," I continued, locking my eyes onto his. "You planted seeds of betrayal and you watered them with my stolen labor. You threw me to the wolves and told me that failures do not belong in your pristine house. Well, the harvest has finally arrived. The wolves did not eat me. I became the leader of the pack, and now you are standing in my territory, demanding the very grace you explicitly denied me when I was starving." I took a slow, deliberate step backward, signaling to my security contractors that the conversation was officially over. The four massive men immediately stepped forward, forming an impenetrable human wall between me and my ruined parents. "You came to the wrong building for charity." The echo of my final statement hung in the freezing, cavernous space of the marble lobby. The sheer finality of my words struck Yvonne with the force of a physical blow. The absolute realization that the deep, bottomless well of family obligation she had relied on her entire life was completely dry finally broke her. She let out a guttural, wretched sob that tore through her throat, a sound completely devoid of her former country club refinement. It was the raw, unfiltered sound of total desperation. She lunged forward, attempting to bypass the massive wall of dark-suited security personnel surrounding me. She reached out with her trembling, unmanicured hands, her fingers desperately grasping at the empty air between us, trying to physically grab my arm. Jada, please, she wailed, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her hollowed cheeks. You cannot do this. We are your parents. I carried you. I raised you. You owe us your respect. You owe us your help. We have nothing left. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I simply took one single calculated step backward, ensuring I remained entirely out of her frantic reach. My movement was smooth, clinical, and completely detached. The physical boundary I established was absolute. My security chief immediately shifted his stance, his massive frame completely blocking Yvonne's path and forcing her to stumble backward into Calvin. Calvin caught her by the shoulders, his own face contorted with a mixture of terror and lingering, desperate arrogance. He looked at me, his eyes wide, frantically searching for the obedient, desperate-to-please daughter he had terrorized for 3 decades. He found absolutely nothing but an impenetrable fortress of obsidian corporate power. You listen to your mother! Calvin demanded, his voice shaking violently as he tried to summon the booming authoritative tone of his former megachurch deacon persona. We are blood. You do not turn your back on blood. You fix the situation right now. I looked at them both, my expression remaining completely unchanged. I slowly reached up and adjusted the cuff of my tailored blazer, letting the silence stretch out until their heavy, panicked breathing was the only sound in the massive lobby. I had waited my entire life for this exact moment. I had spent countless nights crying in cramped studio apartments, working myself to the bone, wondering why my own flesh and blood despised me so deeply. Now standing at the absolute pinnacle of my industry, I finally had the answer. It did not matter. Their validation was entirely worthless. I lowered my hands, locking my eyes onto my father's trembling face. I dug into the deepest, darkest archives of my memory, pulling out the exact daggers they had buried in my back years ago. It was time to return the blades. Do you remember the day I came to your house asking for a signature? I asked, my voice dangerously soft, yet carrying perfectly across the polished marble floor. I was 22 years old. I had been working 3 brutal kitchen jobs, saving every single penny to start my first catering business. I had the business plan. I had the client list. All I needed was a cosigner for a miserable $15,000 commercial lease. Calvin swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously toward the security guards. You were sitting in your leather recliner reviewing the purchase agreement for Malik's brand new luxury sports car. I continued, my tone perfectly level. I begged you for help. I told you it was my only chance to build a future. Do you remember what you told me, Dad? I did not wait for his answer. I stepped slightly forward, closing the distance just enough to ensure he felt the absolute freezing weight of my words. You looked me dead in the eye and said, "You need to learn independence at some point." Yvonne let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth as the exact quote struck her memory. You told me that funding a failure was a bad investment, I stated, my voice echoing with lethal precision. You wrote a $60,000 check for a car your son would eventually crash, and you sent me out into the street with absolutely nothing. You forced me to learn independence, Calvin. You should be immensely proud. I learned it perfectly. I learned how to build an empire completely independent of your toxic conditional charity. But this is different, Yvonne pleaded, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch. We are going to be homeless, Jada. They are taking our house. You cannot compare a business loan to us sleeping on the street. I shifted my gaze to my mother, dissecting her desperate, tear-stained face with surgical coldness. Is it different, Mom? I asked, tilting my head slightly. Do you remember my 25th birthday? I had just secured my first major corporate contract. I wanted to celebrate with my family. I drove 2 hours to your house, bringing a custom cake I had baked myself. When I walked through the front door, you were hosting a massive engagement dinner for Chelsea and Malik. Yvonne physically shrank back, her shoulders curling inward as if trying to hide from the memory. You met me in the foyer, I continued relentlessly. You blocked the doorway to the dining room. You told me that Malik needed to impress Chelsea's wealthy parents and that my flour-stained clothes and cheap car were an embarrassment to the family image. I begged you to just let me sit at the end of the table. Do you remember your exact words, Yvonne? I paused, letting the silence stretch out, forcing her to anticipate the strike. You placed your hand on the doorframe, looked at me with absolute disgust, and said, "It is just practical. We need to focus our resources on the child who is actually going to succeed." My mother let out a loud, wretched sob, burying her face in Calvin's cheap gray blazer. She could not bear the reflection of her own monstrous behavior. "It is just practical, Mom," I repeated, throwing her venom directly back into her face. "It is simply bad business to invest corporate funds into individuals with a proven track record of catastrophic financial fraud. My holding group does not underwrite criminal liabilities. It is nothing personal. It is just practical." Calvin's face contorted with a mixture of profound shame and rising impotent rage. He realized that logic, guilt, and religious manipulation were entirely useless. He was facing a mirror that reflected only his own horrific parenting, and the reflection was destroying him. "You vindictive, ungrateful girl!" Calvin snarled, taking a sudden aggressive step forward. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, his voice echoing loudly off the soaring 30-foot ceilings. "We gave you life. We put a roof over your head. You owe us everything. You cannot just erase us from your life because you finally got a little bit of money." I did not step back this time. I stood my ground, my posture radiating total, unbreakable dominance. I looked at the man who had tormented me, realizing with absolute clarity just how incredibly small and pathetic he truly was. "Do you remember the week I finally moved out?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh, commanding whisper that cut through his shouting instantly. I was packing my few boxes into my beat-up car. I went upstairs to grab my last winter coat from my closet. I found you and Malik tearing down my shelves and throwing my childhood belongings into heavy black trash bags. Calvin froze, his outstretched fingers slowly lowering as the memory locked into place. "Malik needed a home office for his new fraudulent investment firm," I stated coldly. "You did not even wait for me to officially leave the premises before you began erasing my existence from that house. I asked you why you were throwing my things away. I asked you why you couldn't even wait 24 hours. I locked my eyes entirely onto his, ensuring he felt the full, devastating impact of the final boundary. You laughed at me, Calvin. You handed me a trash bag and said, 'I don't have enough space for you in my life.'" The words hung in the air, a devastating, unanswerable conclusion to decades of abuse. Calvin's mouth opened and closed, but absolutely no sound came out. The realization that he had personally forged the exact weapons I was currently using to destroy him completely paralyzed his cognitive functions. "I do not have enough space for you in my life," I repeated, my voice devoid of any anger, sadness, or resentment. It was a simple, undeniable statement of fact. My life is filled with success, integrity, and people who actually respect me. There is absolutely zero room left for parasites. I turned my head, slightly breaking eye contact with my ruined parents, and looked directly at my security chief. "Remove them," I ordered. The command was executed with immediate, ruthless efficiency. The four massive security contractors stepped forward in perfect unison. Two of them grabbed Calvin by the arms, their heavy grips locking onto his cheap blazer with unyielding force. The other two flanked Yvonne, stepping smoothly into her personal space and forcing her to move backward. "No," Calvin shouted, his voice cracking violently as he tried to plant his feet against the polished marble floor. "You cannot do this. Let go of me. Jada, tell them to stop. Jada, please." Yvonne began to scream, a high-pitched, hysterical sound of total disbelief. She thrashed against the guards, her arms flailing wildly. "We are your parents. You cannot throw us out. Please, we have nowhere to go." Jada. The security team completely ignored their frantic struggles. They marched Calvin and Yvonne forcefully across the massive expanse of the lobby, their heavy boots clicking rhythmically against the stone. Another guard quickly gathered their three scuffed, pathetic suitcases and trailed behind the procession. I stood in the center of the lobby, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, watching the chaotic spectacle unfold. Calvin was shouting idle, desperate threats about suing me, about exposing me to the press, about dragging my name through the mud. Yvonne was simply wailing, her shrill cries echoing off the obsidian pillars. The guards reached the massive revolving glass doors at the front of the headquarters. Without a single moment of hesitation, they forcefully shoved Calvin and Yvonne through the spinning glass. The heavy doors rotated violently, depositing my screaming, disgraced parents onto the cold, unforgiving pavement of the Manhattan streets, leaving them to face their long, pathetic bus ride back to the ruins of their Atlanta lives. The guards tossed their cheap luggage out the side doors, which hit the concrete with a dull, heavy thud. The glass doors stopped spinning. The thick, soundproof architecture of the building instantly severed their voices. The lobby returned to a state of pristine, perfect corporate silence. I stood completely still for a long moment, staring at the empty glass doors. I waited for the heavy, crushing wave of guilt to hit me. I waited for the lingering childhood trauma to convince me that I had made a terrible mistake. I waited for the profound sorrow of losing my parents to finally break my composure. Absolutely nothing happened. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I felt no sorrow. Instead, a profound, overwhelming sense of lightness washed over my entire body. The heavy, suffocating chains of familial obligation, the desperate yearning for validation, the toxic need to prove my worth to people who were fundamentally incapable of seeing it, it all simply vanished. The slate was completely wiped clean. I was the absolute master of my own universe, and the only voices that mattered were the ones I chose to invite into my space. I slowly turned around. My assistant Sarah was standing a few feet away, holding her digital tablet tightly against her chest. Her expression was completely professional, but her eyes held a deep, unspoken respect for what she had just witnessed. I walked past her, heading smoothly toward the private executive elevator that would take me back up to the untouchable heights of my corporate empire. "Sarah," I said, my voice crisp, energetic, and completely alive. "Yes, ma'am," she replied instantly, falling into step right behind me. "Have the jet fueled I ordered, pressing the button for the penthouse floor. I'm going home." The private jet ride back to Maui was not just a flight. It was a massive physical exhalation. I left the freezing concrete canyons of Manhattan and the pathetic, desperate ghosts of my past far behind, chasing the sun across the Pacific. When the wheels of the Gulf Stream finally touched down on the private tarmac in Kahului, the heavy, invisible armor I had worn to face my parents completely dissolved. The humid, tropical air wrapped around me the second I stepped out of the cabin. I was not just returning to an island. I was returning to the undisputed center of my own universe. The drive to my newly purchased beachfront estate took less than an hour. I had acquired the property 2 weeks prior, an architectural masterpiece of glass, dark teak wood, and volcanic stone built directly into the side of a coastal cliff. It was a fortress of absolute tranquility. Floor-to-ceiling windows completely erased the boundary between the expansive living spaces and the endless blue horizon of the Pacific Ocean. There were no dark corners, no oppressive suburban walls, and absolutely no memories of flour-dusted basements or screaming matches. Tonight, the estate was glowing with warm amber light from the scattered fire pits lining the massive lanai. I walked out onto the terrace, the soft wood cool against my bare feet. A massive custom-built dining table carved from a single slab of reclaimed monkey pod wood dominated the outdoor space. It was set flawlessly with raw silk runners, handcrafted ceramics, and heavy crystal wine glasses that caught the flickering firelight. For the first time in my entire life, I was not the one setting the table. I took my seat at the absolute head of the table. I leaned back into the plush upholstered chair, resting my hands on the smooth wooden armrests. The feeling of simply sitting, of being completely still while a spectacular event was orchestrated around me, was profoundly foreign and incredibly intoxicating. I was not rushing between a hot oven and a dining room, desperately trying to ensure the meat was perfectly rested, while simultaneously dodging Yvonne's sharp, whispered critiques about my hair or my weight. I was not plating hors d'oeuvres for people who looked right through me. I was the master of the house, and I was waiting to be served. From the massive open-concept outdoor kitchen, Chef Mateo offered a respectful nod. He was a brilliant culinary artist I had hired away from a Michelin-starred restaurant in Honolulu. He was currently searing locally caught ahi tuna and delicately arranging microgreens with precise, calculated movements. The aroma of toasted macadamia nuts, brown butter, and fresh citrus drifted across the terrace. I watched him work, feeling a deep, resonant appreciation for the craft without carrying the crushing burden of the labor. The sound of loud, vibrant laughter echoed from the main house, breaking my quiet reflection. The heavy glass doors slid open, and my chosen family spilled out onto the lanai, bringing an immediate wave of genuine chaotic warmth into the pristine space. Keisha led the charge, looking absolutely spectacular in a flowing, brightly colored silk maxi dress. She had a half-empty glass of expensive champagne in one hand, and she was in the middle of telling a loud, animated story. She had officially relocated to the island 3 weeks ago, accepting a senior consulting position within my holding group. She was the only blood relative I had allowed to cross the threshold of my new life, because she was the only one who had ever recognized my worth before my bank account validated it. Right behind her was Sarah. My former executive assistant had shed her severe Manhattan corporate suit for a relaxed, elegant linen jumpsuit. She was no longer just an assistant. After the flawless execution of the Sterling acquisition, I had promoted her to Chief Operating Officer. She had earned her place at this table through unwavering loyalty, brutal efficiency, and a shared understanding of what it took to survive in rooms designed to keep us out. Rounding out the group were Marcus and Elena, the two angel investors who had reviewed my very first catering business plan all those years ago. When Calvin had laughed in my face and refused to co-sign a miserable $15,000 lease, they had looked at my flour-stained apron and seen a relentlessly driven entrepreneur. They had written the seed check that started everything. They were not just business partners. They were the mentors who had taught me how to swim with sharks without becoming one. Jada Keisha called out, raising her champagne flute in my direction as she claimed the seat directly to my right. This house is absolutely ridiculous. I just got lost looking for the powder room and ended up in an indoor botanical garden. You are living like a literal Bond villain, and I am entirely here for it. I smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that I never once displayed in the presence of my biological family. I aim to please Keisha. Just wait until you see the wine cellar. The evening flowed with a beautiful, effortless rhythm. Chef Mateo presented course after course of extraordinary food. We ate seared scallops with a lilikoi reduction braised short ribs that melted on the fork, and an exquisite passion fruit tart that balanced tartness with perfect sugary precision. The wine glasses were kept full, the conversation was sharp and engaging, and the laughter was loud and completely authentic. There was no performative boasting. There was no walking on eggshells. Sarah did not have to pretend to be a subservient assistant, and I did not have to pretend to be a dutiful daughter. We talked about global market trends, about aggressive expansion strategies, and about the sheer unbelievable audacity of the people we had left behind in the dust. At one point between the main course and dessert, Keisha leaned back in her chair and looked at me, her expression turning thoughtful. I saw the news alerts about the indictments yesterday, Keisha said, keeping her voice casual but deliberate. The federal prosecutors are not offering Malik a plea deal. They are going for the maximum sentence. And the bank officially auctioned off the Atlanta house. It sold for pennies. The table grew quiet, the ocean waves providing a soft, rhythmic backdrop to the heavy information. Sarah looked at me carefully, gauging my reaction. Marcus and Elena waited respectfully, allowing me to dictate the emotional temperature of the room. I took a slow sip of my red wine, letting the complex flavors settle on my tongue. I pictured the gray concrete of the Manhattan street where my security team had deposited Calvin and Yvonne. I pictured them dragging their cheap, scuffed suitcases to the Port Authority bus terminal, their entire world reduced to absolute ash. I swallowed the wine and set the crystal glass down on the teak wood. Good, I said, my voice perfectly clear and entirely devoid of malice. Keisha let out a sharp, appreciative laugh. That is what I am talking about. No tears for the wicked. It was the absolute truth. Sitting there surrounded by the people who had actively participated in my rise, I realized the true depth of my victory. The most profound triumph was not the money. It was not the beachfront estate or the private jets or the corporate acquisitions. The ultimate victory was the complete and total absence of guilt. For decades, my parents had conditioned me to believe that my existence was a burden. They had programmed me to accept that their love was a limited resource and that Malik was the only one worthy of the investment. They had built a massive generational machine designed to extract my labor, my talent, and my sanity to fuel their own narcissistic delusions. They had weaponized the concept of family to keep me subservient, to keep me hungry, and to keep me trapped in the dark. But the cycle of generational trauma had violently collided with an immovable object. It shattered against my ambition. The curse of the Wilson family, the endless cycle of fake prestige, financial ruin, and emotional manipulation stopped exactly here. It stopped with me. I looked around the table at Keisha, Sarah, Marcus, and Elena. This was my family now. A family forged in the trenches of mutual respect, shared struggle, and undeniable loyalty. They did not demand my submission. They demanded my excellence, and they celebrated my power. I realized in that quiet, profound moment the ultimate anatomy of revenge. Revenge is not screaming at the people who hurt you. It is not begging them to understand your pain or forcing them to acknowledge your worth. They are fundamentally broken machines, completely incapable of processing the damage they cause. Trying to force a toxic family to see your value is like trying to draw blood from a stone. It only leaves you exhausted, bleeding, and empty. The ultimate revenge is starvation. It is starving a toxic family of your energy, your resources, and your reactions. It is completely cutting off the supply of the lies they fed you to keep you small. Calvin and Yvonne needed me to be a failure so they could feel successful. Malik needed me to be invisible so he could shine. Chelsea needed me to be the hired help so she could feel like royalty. I took all of that away. I starved them of their favorite punching bag, and while they sat in the dark choking on the bitter ashes of their ruined, fraudulent empire, I walked out into the sun and built a banquet table large enough to seat everyone who had ever truly believed in me. I starved them while I feasted on the empire I built with my own two hands. The tropical sun finally began its rapid descent toward the horizon. The sky exploded into a breathtaking canvas of fiery orange, deep magenta, and brilliant violet. The vibrant colors reflected off the surface of the infinity pool, casting a warm, triumphant glow across the massive wooden dining table. Chef Mateo emerged from the kitchen carrying a silver tray lined with tall, elegant crystal flutes. He poured a vintage champagne, the pale golden liquid bubbling aggressively in the fading light. He handed a glass to each of my guests before passing the final flute to me. I stood up from the head of the table. The conversation immediately ceased. My chosen family turned their attention toward me, their faces illuminated by the fire pits and the setting sun. They looked at me with absolute, unfiltered respect. There was no jealousy, there was no hidden agenda, there was only shared, triumphant joy. I held the cool crystal flute in my hand, feeling the delicate weight of it. I looked out over the Pacific Ocean, watching the massive waves roll endlessly toward the shore. I thought about the damp, freezing basement kitchen in Atlanta. I thought about the flour-stained aprons, the exhaustion, the tears, and the desperate silent prayers for a way out. I thought about Yvonne telling me I was taking up too much space. I thought about Calvin throwing my business plan into the garbage. I raised my glass high, catching the final brilliant rays of the Hawaiian sun. I looked down the length of the beautiful, abundant table at the people who were currently feasting on the fruits of my undeniable success. A slow, deep, victorious smile spread across my face. To empty kitchens, I toasted my voice ringing out clear and absolute against the sound of the crashing waves. To empty kitchens, the table echoed back in perfect, thunderous unison. The crystal glasses met in the center of the table, ringing out with a sharp, brilliant chime that carried out over the water. I took a long, slow drink of the champagne, tasting the crisp, undeniable flavor of absolute permanent freedom. The sun dipped below the horizon, pulling the final light from the sky and leaving the world entirely in my hands. Fade to black. The most profound lesson from this journey is that your inherent worth is never determined by people entirely incapable of seeing it. Toxic family dynamics thrive on conditioning you to believe that love must be earned through subservience and endless sacrifice. True liberation begins the exact moment you stop seeking validation from broken sources. You hold the absolute power to sever ties with those who drain your spirit, regardless of shared blood. Building your own empire requires starving your abusers of your energy and redirecting that fierce determination into your own success. Your chosen family will always outshine forced obligations. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to build your own table, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your story of triumph in the comments below.